We say this world is made by mind alone. And in our minds, when we use our minds, we create these categories and functions. But what is really true? You know, Zen is an inquiry practice. What am I? I've been watching this show on TV. It's the dramatization of a novel called Pachinko. And it's a novel that I had read. And last night we were watching a section of it. And in the translation, I could see that this woman said to this man, "What is this?" And the language that I heard in Korean was Imoko. Imoko is when Marshall taught us that tonight, clear mind, clear mind, clear mind, don't know. In Korea, they sometimes use Imoko as the object of meditation. What is this? Each one of us brings up that question, and then we immediately go into concept and idea. Our practice is about dropping down into the reality of this moment, not the idea of what is this, but literally, what is this? So I want to do something a little bit different tonight to start off the talk. In the spirit of inquiry, I'd like you all to do a little bit of inquiry work. So drop back in, if you're willing, into your meditation. Lower your eyes, find your breath, feel your body, and bring yourself into the present moment. This question, what am I, really is the point of our practice. And it's not to have an answer, but it's to observe and to become aware of this moment. So feel your breath, feel your body, that we can say in quotes that we inhabit. And those of you who may be listening to this talk on YouTube, please do the same. Drop in. Bring up this great question, what am I and what is this? So in the spirit of inquiry, take a moment to review this past week or two and bring up whatever it is that you may be struggling with in your life. What is going on in your life that is challenging to you? Things that you're having to deal with that maybe you didn't expect to have to deal with. Look inward and investigate. What are these stuck points that you're dealing with? Maybe think about the relationships you're in, friends, family, work, friends. Just what are the conflict points that you're feeling in your relationships? What are the places that you're getting stuck? Or maybe you see it as a place that somebody else is getting stuck. But it's your reality. So make it your stuck point. What are you struggling with? What is the unexpected thing that's coming up that is challenging you to find out how to live in the very moment that you're living in? Maybe you're seeing some aspects of yourself that make you feel uncomfortable. Maybe there are parts of yourself that you're not that fond of. And in relationship or in dealing with a difficult situation, you find yourself acting in ways that you don't really like, but you do it anyway. So just get a little familiar with yourself and with these questions. And maybe one last question, what are you concerned about that's coming your way? What is it that maybe takes your breath away when you think of having to face it or deal with it? Sometimes we think of it as anxiety, but it may just be being asked to present yourself in a situation that feels quite challenging. Notice what that is. Notice what you're working with. So take a few more breaths, settling yourself, maybe becoming more aware of what the ground that you've covered in this inquiry. And then when you're ready, just open your eyes, come back, and we'll just move on with the talk. There's been a theme, it feels like, we've been dealing with, and maybe I see it this way because on our YouTube channel, the last video that Jason put up was a video of his own that was titled something like Zen is Everyday Life. And I know for myself, that's that point where our practice and our life come together is the interesting point of practice, and to me is the alive point. There's a lot of theoretical things that can be said, a lot of books that can be read. Sometimes I see a quote of mine that's put up on the internet and it's boring to me. It's just words. Now maybe at another time when I said it, or maybe when I first experienced it, it was alive. But so much of what we call teaching can sometimes we say it over and over and over again. In the old days, we don't talk about it as much anymore, but there are these phrases that come up in our school all the time. And we hear them so much they lose their meaning. But when we enter into the moment of our life, things become alive. It's not theoretical anymore. It's not some story to be told. It's an experience to be lived. And since Zen is about how do we present ourselves completely in the moment, embrace the moment. In a way, we sometimes say that the moment and myself become one. There's no separation. And from that moment, in that point, how do we find our way? So when I was thinking about this talk, I thought maybe I'd just mention a few of the things that came up for me as I was working with that inquiry. And I want to do this just to name specifics, not theoretical. So many of you come each week, and you know I was gone last week, and we went on a vacation, my wife Sheridan and I. So the night before the vacation started, I realized that a crown on my tooth was loose. And it really felt like it could fall off at any moment. And here we were, it was the night before we were going to travel. It was no time to go to the dentist. So this became a big challenge. And since it didn't fall off, it became a practice point for the whole time I was away. And honestly, I still haven't been able to get into the dentist. The crown is still hanging there. But what it's meant is every time I eat, I have to be aware of every chew, because if I chew something hard on this side, I feel like I could lose the crown. So I've entered into a practice not only of mindful eating, but of mindful toothbrushing. And in order to deal with this reality of my loose crown, I've had to alter my patterns, and I've had to bring more awareness, like I said, to each chew, to each brush of my toothbrush. And I notice my tongue going to this crown and pushing at it multiple times a day, with some understanding that the more I do that, the more likely it is that the crown will fall off. And the first dentist appointment I could get was not this coming Monday, but the Monday after. So I've got a long way to go. So this very, in a way, silly point. There's nothing special about this problem. But as a Zen practitioner, it's a point of practice. It's brought all of my attention to my eating. If I unconsciously chew, I can hurt myself. And we all know a new crown could be $1,000, $1,500. So there's a financial stress that's involved. There's, before, at least I'm home now. When I was in Santa Fe, I didn't know any dentists. I was in an environment that wasn't my own. So life forced me to be mindful. That's a way that our practice comes alive in our everyday life. What do you need to be mindful of? So, without getting into any detail, since my wife is on this, is here at this talk, although I wouldn't do it without, if she weren't here either, but as naturally happens, you travel together, you're with somebody 24 hours a day, there are relationship stresses that arise. Each one of those moments of stress in a relationship are practice points. They're Dharma gates that are available to us. And I know for myself, in the face of some of those stresses, I see reactions of mine, I see traits of mine that I'm not that proud of. My impatience, there are qualities that I can fall into under stress. I think when I started practice, I believed that the idea of practice was to get rid of all of that. So that by this time in my practice and in my life, I wouldn't have these stresses anymore, because I would have overcome all the reasons that they arose, and I would have a kind of even-keeled, placid relationship. Where I am now in my life, and it is true, as Marshall said, I'm a psychotherapist. I have a lot more understanding about psychology and human nature. At this point, I've given up the idea of getting rid of and have moved my practice towards how do I work with. So it feels to me, and you all may have a different view of this, but I think the way I hold it, I've moved out of the fantasy of of the miracle of practice, and I've moved into the reality of the value of meeting the moment and engaging with my practice in the midst of the difficulties. So when I observe these aspects of my personality, you might say, that I'm not proud of, rather than blame somebody else or pretend they're not happening, I move toward them. And I ask, what is this? What is it that I'm responding to internally? Rather than pointing my finger, which one of the aspects I maybe aren't so proud of is the fact that I can sometimes do that. But when I see my finger out here, I remember to turn it back. What am I? What am I bringing to this situation? How am I helping to co-create this situation that may be painful to not only myself, but to the other? So in our relationships, we have the possibility of bringing our practice right into the moment and noticing the denial, noticing the avoidance, and grabbing the energy that sits in our lower abdomen and using that to stay put, to stay present, to be willing to feel and look at the parts that seem ugly and distasteful. So again, in the fantasy of practice, that all goes away. The Buddha had this absolute enlightenment and he never had to worry again. Maybe. But looking around this group here tonight, and most everybody, really everybody that I work with, we're householders. We're living a lay life. And when we live a lay life, we're constantly interacting and being forced to deal with things. Back in 2011, we had our Quantum School of Zen Whole World as a Single Flower Conference in India. And at the end of the conference, some people went off to Nepal, to Kathmandu, and my wife and I, we went to the town of Tiruvannamalai, which is the town that holds the ashram of Ramana Maharshi. And I don't know if everybody knows Ramana Maharshi, but he was, I guess we'd call it as an aspect of the Advaita school of Hinduism is the name we give to it. And it's in many ways parallel to Zen. And Ramana Maharshi had an opening when he was 16 years old, when he was very sick and thought he was going to die. And he left home after that, and he ended up down in this area of Tiruvannamalai, and he spent about, I think it was 13 years in a cave. And actually the cave is still active and open, and we could go there, and when we got there, it was a wonderful place to practice. And there were about 8 people in it, and the energy was quite powerful. But the kanban that I got from that was the question, why would anybody go into a cave for 13 years? What's the practice point of that? And I can't answer it for Ramana Maharshi. But for myself, what I came to is it's a way of stopping the stimulus. If we look at our lives, we're like I said, as we looked inward, there's always new stuff coming up. But if you shut yourself off in a cave, you stop, at least you either stop that process or at least you minimize it. So maybe spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, you can unwind. But we don't have that luxury as lay people. Once we think we're finished with one thing, immediately something else arises. Again, maybe I'm assuming you're all like me and it's not true for you, but I work with a lot of people. And everybody is dealing with something, always. And, we wish for it to be graceful, but it's not always so. So how do we bring our practice to our lives? Many of you have heard me say this before. Our third great vow is the teachings are infinite. We vow to learn them all. In some of the Soto Zen schools, they say, Dharma gates are endless. We vow to enter them all. And honestly, that's the teaching I'm pushing tonight. Each moment is a Dharma gate. Each moment, we have a possibility of being alive and present and responsive to the situation as it arises. So as I was the way I work on these talks is they percolate, and they percolate for days. And by the time Wednesday comes around, the percolation needs to come together. And often what happens is, as I'm maybe looking at Facebook or something on the internet, some teaching appears. So today, I have a friend, I don't see him very often. He's the abbot of the Berkeley Zen Center named Alan Sanaki. He's just become the abbot. He's a social activist and a musician and a Zen practitioner. And he had a little article that he put up that I was reading. And in the article, he quoted, he mentioned the name Zen Master Unmun. I think he said it differently, but I believe it's the way we call him is Zen Master Unmun. And Zen Master Unmun was asked, what is the practice of a lifetime? And his response was an appropriate response. What is the practice of a lifetime? An appropriate response. Moment to moment to moment. It's not an appropriate response to one thing, which is our life. Each moment our life is appearing. How do we meet it? How do we find that response? In our school, we call that correct function. How do we clear ourselves, or clear our minds and our hearts, being able to be present enough to actually know what's going on? We call that correct situation. Not my idea, but what is it really? So again, we're bringing our practice to look. What is it that I'm seeing? Our seeing is so colored by our idea of seeing that we often miss what's right in front of us. There's a koan that I like a lot in our koan book, and I'll sometimes ask it, and the question is, what is right in front of you? And very often, people will answer, you. Or maybe a little better answer, they may say Zen Master Bon Soeng. But those are names. Those are ideas. What is Zen Master Bon Soeng? You say that, you have that image of Zen Master Bon Soeng, that creates a whole reality in your mind. I bet you that reality doesn't line up with this guy sitting here. You probably have some of it, but you don't have all the information. We never have all the information. We forget that. This experience with COVID shows it to me over and over again. As soon as the numbers start to go down, there's this feeling, oh good, we're done, we're going to get back to our regular life. And then a month later, the graph's moving in the other direction. We never have all the information. So we can't even rely on information alone to tell us what that correct function is. And I'm going to tell you something that maybe is a touch heretical, but this idea that we have in our school, we say, you touch into your don't know nature, and then, boom, you understand everything and correct situation appears right in front of you. That's a nice idea. My experience says there's always more to strip away. We fool ourselves when we think we're clear. We're better off staying with not knowing and not entering into I am something. Because whatever we say I am, there's another, on the next thought, we probably realize I'm not that. Because nothing, we're too complex to be reduced to one idea. This world that we live in is quite complex. There's so much happening. My younger brother just had his 63rd birthday, and he told me, I guess he did the math, he told me that meant there were 23,010 days, I think that's what he said, that he's been alive. Think of today. Think of how much happened to you today. Think of how much you had to deal with. Think of all those things that came up for you in the inquiry about what you're working with. And then multiply all of that experience by 23,000. Somebody told me today that I think Dogen said that there are about 6 billion moments in a day. So now multiply 6 billion by 23,000. That's how much experience we have. We can't contain that. We don't know what's going on. But we have the capacity to build, to use our practice, number one, just to build our don't know energy, to build our center, we have this wonderful, vague practice of sitting meditation. Breathing in, what is this? Breathing out, don't know. Gathering energy in our lower abdomen. Maybe some stability of mind that allows us the courage to strip away more and more of our defenses, to actually be present in our vulnerability and to respond to the world that way. As this has been going on for a number of years, but the pandemic has increased this in my life. A big part of my formal Zen practice in the last couple of years has become walking meditation. Our folks in Korea, they came up with this name. They call it mantra walks. And I could have 2 hours a day, some days, of mantra walk, where I've got my beads, I've got my feet, I've got my territory, and I just start walking. And I use Kwansein Bosal as my mantra. I tie it to my feet, and I got my beads. Every time I go through it, I flip, and I start walking. Now, I can't tell you that I stay with the mantra the entire time, but it's the base of my practice. And what I've noticed happens is, in some ways, the way I might say we work with kungans, but this is the kungan of my everyday life. As I'm walking, and as I'm facing some of these things that I've been talking about, it's as if I keep tossing it up in the air like a ball. Or I think maybe better than a ball might be like a salad. I keep tossing it. And every time I toss it, it looks a little different. And every time I toss it, I get to see it in a little bit of a different way. And the contours shift. And what sometimes, I don't know whether to say sometimes or often, but it's not infrequent. As I'm doing this tossing, I see a way through. I find a path that I probably had never seen before. And I find a path, and very often if I can follow that path, I can find that correct function. But it requires that kind of tossing, that kind of observation. If I think one toss is enough, I'm not likely to find that path. I have to keep tossing it. I have to be willing to not settle in on too quickly on an answer, but maybe in our Zen parlance to say, to keep the don't know mind. What am I? What is this? It's not just a meditation, an object of meditation. It's I don't know the word. It's a stance. It's a way to live. It's not theoretical. We work on our not knowing mind. If we truly can maybe buy into what feels like a deep truth to me, that not knowing is the path to wisdom and compassion. Not knowing is uncomfortable sometimes. Not knowing is vulnerable. Not knowing is destabilizing. So a lot of our formal practice is about finding that stability, finding the ability to stay upright. We sometimes use the metaphor of, in Japan, they have these Bodhidharma dolls that they carve, and they have a round bottom. And when you knock them over, they pop right back up. That's Zen mind. Sometimes we say, fall down 7 times, get up 8 times. To have the fortitude and the courage to stay with what is uncomfortable, or maybe just unclear. And I think the last thing I want to say, what occurred to me as I was processing all this for the talk, is that this is where creativity comes alive. If we're willing to stay in not knowing, and if we're willing to keep tossing the question up, I really think that it opens our innate creativity. I think I used to have the view that everyone is creative. And in some ways, of course, everyone is. But there have been times where I have said to somebody, well, you're creative, work with it. And they've said, well, maybe I'm not as creative as you think. We all get stuck in a box. We think something is true, so we act as if it's true. And then confirmation bias just keeps telling us that it's true. We cherry pick what confirms what we believe, and we ignore what doesn't confirm our beliefs. And maybe simply put, Zen practice is about widening our view, keeping a don't know mind, and not getting stuck in the box. Because we all know that moment of jumping out of the box, and suddenly there's an answer that makes all the discordant things fit together. It's not easy, and it's not simple, and it's too facile to say, only don't know and do it and you'll find it. You have to work at it. There's a reason we call it practice. It's repetitive and it strengthens us. But a life lived through practice is dynamic, it's alive, it's not always pleasant, but without the unpleasant, you would never know pleasant. And one of the attitudes that a practitioner can gain is the grit of wanting to work with what's difficult, or at least not being afraid to do it, because we're all faced with difficult situations all the time. Maybe today is not so bad, but tomorrow somebody you love might be very sick. You will lose something you don't want to lose. You will want something you can't have. You will struggle with these discordant energies in your psyche. And practice, bringing practice to the moments of our lives, gives us a way to work with that.